your views concerning the situation in the country. Let's take it first. Let's take the issue of new Naira notes and the deficit. Will I say the deficit in oil supply?
Yes. Well, thank you very much. First of all, as you said, the new the Naira redesign for some of the Naira denominations, unfortunately, has come at a time when there's already a lot of tension and a lot of negativity, if you like, in the environment. Normally, redesigning your currency is something that is done by virtually all economies from time to time. But I think what has happened in this context is both the timing and the strategy of the implementation really should have been better thought through. First of all, as I said, the timing. We are facing an election. There's already a high level of tension and all sorts of controversies. Secondly, to be honest, the economy is not in the most healthy state. People have all sorts of issues with the economy. There's also the continuing security challenges we are facing. So all these things add to a state of discontent, if you like. So when the new Naira redesign came up, the first thing that ought to have been taken into account is this should not worsen the situation, particularly for the generality of Nigerians. The concept itself, like I said, is not new. And indeed, it may have validity in terms of some of the objectives that it was intended to serve. But at the end of the day, every policy should be evaluated, assessed on the basis of its impact, not just on the basis of its stretch, but on the basis of its likely impact on people, because policies are made to affect people's lives, hopefully to improve people's livelihood as well. So if you're in a situation where a policy is likely to have a negative impact on people's lives, then it is important that careful assessment of the pros and cons should be made before it is implemented. And it is also imperative that in the course of implementation, effort should be made to minimize any potential hardships on people that may be brought by the policy. It appears that in this context, perhaps that has not been thoroughly done. And what we have observed is that a large number of Nigerians, in fact, the majority of Nigerians, have been put in some difficulty as a result of that policy. Because we're not talking about the top 10, top 20%. We're talking about the majority, the larger number of Nigerians at the bottom of the ladder, the populace. Both in terms of its immediate impact, as well as the potential that with regards to those people, the policy will actually achieve its purpose. One of the key purposes of the policy was supposed to move us towards a cashless economy. And yes, there is justification for saying that the world is going cashless, so Nigeria should not be left behind. But I think we should not expect that because the world is going cashless, our own movement towards cashless economy must be immediate. We must not only catch up, but we must also jump ahead of the queue, whatever the impact on our people. We must say, okay, we will move to a cashless, but we'll move in a way that ensures minimum pain to the majority of our people. But this is not what we see now. So I believe that clearly the government, and particularly the CBN, should have taken a lot more time and care in designing and implementing this policy.
Thank you so much.
First of all, I think the timing is, as I said before, it's probably not the best time to introduce. Secondly, I think the time frame that was given for its implementation is clearly too short. Yes, the government says they have given 3 months, but that 3 months did not take account of the fact that the new Naira was not issued until the last 3 weeks. So essentially, you have not given people 3 months. You have given them only about 3 weeks. Because it's not just a question of those who have tons of money at home. So they are given 3 months to take it to the bank and change. But I think it's those who need money on a continuing basis and therefore are not, and the little money in their hands, they cannot just put it in the bank and wait, right? So I think that's the situation. I think there is need for reconsideration, and I think this need has now been confirmed by the Supreme Court decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer. As an industrialist, how would you describe government inputs into industrial and the manufacturing sector of the country?
Industrialization and manufacturing is a process that must be looked at over an extended period of time. In the last few years, the manufacturing sector in particular has not done too well, largely because of the policy environment has not been helpful. First of all, the environment in terms of the ease of doing business in the manufacturing sector, and indeed in the business sector as a whole, has been very, very severe. Manufacturers are continuously facing challenges with regards to what in other regimes they would normally take for granted, like the issue of basic infrastructure that enables them to continue their businesses effectively and successfully, such as, for instance, energy or power, if you like, which is more specific. The provision of other infrastructure that allows the business environment to thrive, transport infrastructure. The maritime infrastructure, very key. In Nigeria, the maritime infrastructure that is necessary for promoting export and import processes has not been very helpful. There have been a lot of challenges. But even more importantly, in my view, is the regulatory environment. Government is supposed to create an environment in terms of regulations, in terms of policies, and that will help support the business sector, that will support, in this context, the manufacturing sector. But what we have seen is that in many respects, regulations tend to actually create more hurdles to most manufacturers than they're supposed to. Thirdly, it is usual in every industry, in every economy, that one of the roles of government is to provide incentives that will help to support and promote and encourage relevant sectors of the industry so that we will have a more integrated and if you like, more coherent growth of the economy. This kind of incentives will come through incentives to do with tax holidays, etc., that investors can take advantage of to grow their investments and so on. Again, the extent and implementation of such policies, particularly industrial and investment promotion policies, have not been as supportive as we'd expect. Taxation in particular has been very difficult for the manufacturing sector. Not only do we have relatively a limited tax net, which means not many, only a few, if you like, a percentage of the economic actors are paying taxes, and the rates of these taxes keeps going up. And we also have multiplicity of taxes, apart from the normal, corporate tax. You also have various taxes and levies that are imposed on industrialists, on manufacturers, which add to the total cost. So when you have a situation where you don't have the kind of infrastructure you need, you have to spend more to literally provide your own infrastructure. You have to provide to pay higher taxes, higher levies, and so the cost of business becomes higher, and therefore we become less competitive. Lastly, the general economic tone, and particularly, for instance, the macroeconomic environment also has been vacillating because of our dependence on external factors, particularly, say, on oil prices. We have had such a situation where the economy keeps yo-yoing. When the oil price goes up, things get better. When it goes down, things get worse. The impact, for instance, of oil price on availability of foreign exchange to manufacturers to enable them to import all their inputs as well as being a problem. And efforts to streamline the foreign exchange regime have not been successful. We keep creating different windows for foreign exchange, and the consequence of that, of course, you end up with, if you like, leakages of foreign exchange as well as gaps in the market. This is why we have such a huge difference between the official foreign exchange market and, of course, the unofficial market and the various markets. And this adds to the problems of the manufacturing sector. But one thing I want to talk about more is really looking at the external factor. We have, as a country, signed the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is intended to open up the African market as a whole and create opportunities, but also risks. One of the things that imposes is that we must be prepared to support our manufacturers to be able to compete, at least within the African continent, effectively. And the kind of things I've talked about all contribute to that: availability of infrastructure, operating environment, regulatory environment, policies, and so on. These, we need to make sure that we align them with the wider regional and continental market in order to ensure that we don't cut ourselves out of this large market. I think in some respects, yes, there has been some development. For instance, the recent commissioning of the deep sea port in Lekki is a positive one, because by providing this facility, we expect the trade, the maritime trade to improve. Perhaps that will make our import and export, our maritime environment more competitive. But I think there's not enough of these developments. For instance, we've been talking about the transport sector. The railway development, which has started, might be rather slow. I think we need to expedite it to ensure that logistic costs to industries is significantly reduced. The energy sector, particularly the power sector, really is critical. And until we get that right, we will continue to find ourselves in a less competitive position relative to others.
Thank you so much, Engineer. Let me quickly ask you this. As, would I say, just former president of MAN and an astute administrator with the Kaduna refinery, I want to ask you your opinion in the improvement of oil and gas sector in Nigeria. How, because there are many permutations or many saying that they don't see, there is no hope, you know?
Well,
so what's your take on that?
First of all, let me say, yes, there has been some significant improvement in some areas. For instance, I think over the last 20, 30 years, we have seen a lot more indigenization of the industry. A lot more Nigerians are now participating in the industry in a way that perhaps is more likely to be more sustainable over time. There are a number of policies like the local content policy, which has been very, very successful in my view. It has helped many of the local investors, local investors, that's domestic investors in the industry, to get involved, to participate. In some respects, of course, maybe things have not happened the way they should. The new act, the Petroleum Act, yes, we believe it was necessary. It has taken a long time to come, and I think we expect that will even accelerate the participation of Nigerians in the sector. However, on the other hand, the downstream sector has not done very well at all, largely because it's a sector that was dominated by government, and the government has not operated that sector very well. Secondly, policy making with regards to particularly pricing of petroleum products really has been a huge failure. We have failed to recognize that at the end of the day, the sector cannot continue to rely on government refineries alone, particularly given that they have not been successful for many years. That we need to have privatized those assets a long time ago. And even if we have not privatized, we are dependent therefore on import. We need to actually avoid the huge subsidy that has been literally eating our fiscal space. We got to a point where perhaps the subsidy on petroleum products, which is just one product, one need for the people, has swamped all other public services, health, education, transportation. And it has created a problem where we are now in a situation where we are dependent almost totally on imports, but also we are having to borrow a lot more to maintain the fiscal space because of the huge demand on this petroleum system. So I hope that whichever government is coming in should not take too long to completely, do away with the subsidy and re-energize and reorder the industry. We know that globally now there is sort of concern with the in that industry because of its impact on climate and environment. And I think this is more reason, and what is happening elsewhere in other industries, in the automotive industry, in other climates, is now pointing to a point where dependence on fossil fuel is going to decline very rapidly. And this, therefore, important that we now put more effort to exploit the resources we have in order to generate the revenue to invest in new industries, particularly, for instance, the digital industry, the IT industry, new technologies that would ensure that these assets are not just wasted over time. I believe that there's still time. I don't believe, as most people do, that the demand for fossil fuel will extinguish in a few years. I think it will take quite some time, but I think there is justification and need to really exploit as much of it as possible and use the revenue from that exploitation to invest in new technologies. That's very important.
Thank you so much. There is a lot of uproar and down everywhere, but what hope can you give Nigerians in terms of stability of government, in terms of economic stability, and other areas?
I think Nigerians generally, our people are resilient. Yes, we have faced a lot of challenges, and we continue to face different challenges. But we have so far been able to sustain some level of slow growth. In spite of the external headwinds and the internal problems we faced, such as security and so on, I believe that the country can indeed get out of its current malaise and thrive. We have a great population. We have a huge resource base, and we have a market. And so I think if we manage our economy carefully, if we become more future-oriented, if we focus more on people's livelihood, on improving the quality of life of people in terms of our policies, and we recognize that there are basic principles that we have to continue to work with, I think we should be all right. Things are hard now, but there's hope.
Thank you very much. Now, just to wrap it up, for the youth, Nigerian youth, please, I need you to, because you're a voice in Nigeria as we speak, so we need you to speak to the Nigerian youth. That factor that brought the CEO in you, that made you independent, and I'll just give Nigerian youth some short of advice.
I think, first of all, we have a population that clearly establishes no doubt, it should establish no doubt in anybody's mind, that this country is for the youth. Because 60% of our people are below 30, if you like. And therefore, there's a vibrancy, there's capacity, there's energy that, if it is properly directed, can indeed create a fantastic economy. And it is, frankly, up to our youth to be more focused. And yes, there have been huge challenges, which is driving a lot of people outside the country. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, that energy is still there. And that is why other countries are coming and taking our youth out, because they can see the energy, they can see the vibrancy. And I think if we create an environment that supports the youth and enables them to actually exploit their capacities and their strength and their capability, I believe that we'll have a great country. And I think our youth should actually focus on that rather than on the problems we're taking. Every challenge has behind it an opportunity. So if you see the challenge, what you should do is not then to look away, but to say, okay, beyond that challenge is an opportunity. I'm going to try and somehow go over the challenge so that I can access that opportunity. And we see that in everyday life when young people gear themselves up to address some of these challenges. Today, Nigeria had the largest number of, icons, startups in Africa. That is because our young people are very, very innovative and very capable of competing in the world.